Welcome to the Teach Without Tears channel. My name is Tara and I'm so excited that you're here. I just want to quickly reintroduce myself because it has been a while since I've recorded a video for YouTube. So if you have watched any of my past videos, welcome back. If you're brand new here, welcome. I hope that you will follow along and subscribe. So like I said, I'm Tara. I run the Teach Without Tears blog and TPT store, and my goal since I started that business is to help teachers reduce stress, both in the classroom and at home. I was a third grade teacher for 14 years. Actually, one of those years was spent in fifth grade, and then all the rest were in third. And now I'm an online teacher. And in both of those settings, both the classroom and online, I've realized that the key to student success is really differentiation. And that's where we're going to be going on this channel from here on, is really focusing on strategies for differentiation that can help you meet the needs of all of your students. One of my biggest stresses as a teacher, especially my first few years, was that I just felt like I was failing some of my students. I was not able to meet all of their needs because I was trying to teach most of my lessons whole group, and especially in math, I found that those whole group lessons were overwhelming for me because there was one of me and 24 students or even more in my class, and I just could not get to every student and help every student. I had some who were finishing the work in like 5 minutes and done, and they completely understood the concept. And then I had others who, even with me working beside them for most of the math lesson, they still were not understanding it. And I was spending hours at night planning and preparing and trying to make sure I was able to meet the needs of my students, and it just wasn't working. And that's when I started to learn about differentiation and started implementing it in my classroom. And I saw almost immediately a huge change in my students, their attitudes toward learning and also their achievements. So my goal today is to talk about 5 important reasons why you need to use differentiation in your classroom. And then from here, we are going to move into exactly how to do that. So I hope that you will follow along and watch the next videos every Friday. We're going to have Differentiation Day on Friday when a new video will be released, and that's when you can learn the next step in the differentiation process. All right, so let's talk about these 5 reasons. So reason number 1 is that differentiation is really going to help you meet those diverse needs of your students. I just told you that I had students who came in already knowing the content. In third grade math, multiplication was a huge topic that we covered, and I had some third graders come in at the beginning of the year and they had already mastered their multiplication facts. They knew them, they knew how to solve the problems, and didn't really need me to teach them that. And then I had other students who had kind of a basic understanding of multiplication, but they did not know their facts well. And then I had a whole other group who had never been exposed to multiplication. They had no idea what it even was. They definitely did not know their facts, and they needed a lot of support from me. You've probably noticed as you've started the school year that you have those different levels of students as well. Some of them already have a lot of background knowledge. They already know the content you're teaching. Others have forgotten what they learned last school year and have absolutely no idea what you're talking about. So differentiation is going to allow you to meet the needs of those students. When you differentiate, it's not necessarily going to be student by student. I did try that, and that was very overwhelming, trying to give each student something different. So what I found worked best was to really group the students into 3 levels. Kind of a remediation group, those students who were really struggling, who really didn't have a good understanding of the concept. And then an on-level group, those students who came in with some understanding, they just needed help moving forward. They needed me to teach them the content because they hadn't had it before. And then that enrichment group, those students who came in already knowing the material and needing to be pushed and challenged. And I'll be talking more about how to know which group to put your students in the next video, because we're going to be talking about assessment. All right, so let's move on to the second reason that you need to use differentiation, and that is student engagement. As I looked around my classroom when I was trying to teach those whole group lessons, I had some students with their heads down on their desks. They were falling asleep. Some of them, it was because they were bored out of their minds because they already knew everything I was teaching them. Those were my enrichment students, the ones who came in knowing the content ahead of time. But then I had the other students whose heads were on their desks because they had absolutely no idea what I was talking about. They had reached their frustration point because I was continuing to go on with the lesson and they didn't understand the very basic thing that I taught at the very beginning of the lesson. I was doing whole group lessons that went anywhere from 30 to 40 minutes, and attention spans were gone by that point. So I realized that centers were a great way to solve that problem, and it greatly increased my students' engagement because I'm going to use guided math as an example, but you can also do this in other subject areas. But for math, when I switched to a guided math model, I used a 15-minute introduction, a mini lesson, just to introduce the concept to them. And then after that, we broke into 3 groups. There was a meet with the teacher group where students could meet with me. There was also a center where they were doing problem solving. So whatever the skill was for that day, they were applying it at that problem solving center. And then the third center was technology. And because the students were able to get up, they were moving around a lot during math class, they were able to talk with their peers, they were learning from me. There were so many different things involved that their engagement levels increased greatly. And even my struggling math students loved the technology center. They were practicing the math skills, but in a fun way. The problem solving center, the problems were at their level, so they felt successful. And when they were meeting with me, I was able to work with them in a small group of 5 or 6 students so that I could really see whether they were understanding it. And we would do whiteboard drills and lots of interactive things, hands-on manipulatives, so that they were constantly engaged in the lesson. So not only was I able to address those diverse academic needs of my students with guided math, I was also able to engage them in the lesson a lot better than I could when it was whole group. The third reason you need to be using differentiation in your classroom is to promote equity. We want all of our students to have the same opportunities to learn the content, and in order for them to do that, we need to present it to them in different ways. Not everyone learns the same way. So it's the beginning of the school year and you've probably gotten to know your students really well. One thing to focus in on is their learning styles. How do they learn best? Do you have students who are visual learners, who can learn by watching videos or by looking at things? Do you have auditory learners who can learn as you are talking or as they're listening to a story? Or do you have those kinesthetic learners who need to have hands-on activities that are going to keep them engaged? Knowing how your students learn best is going to allow you to plan those lessons, those differentiated lessons that are really going to meet their needs. You can even give your students choices about how they want to learn something. Do they want to listen to a story? Do they want to watch a video? Do they want to do something more hands-on? And that's going to level the playing field for them because they can learn in the way that is best for them. And that's going to promote that equity. I also had to explain to my students that everyone doing the same thing is not necessarily fair and equal because different students need different things. So in writing, some of my students were really struggling with writing. So we were seriously working on basic sentences, just basic sentence structure. Every sentence needs a subject. Every sentence needs a verb. And if I could get a complete sentence from them during our writing block, that was a huge success. I was patting myself on the back and patting them on the back. But then other students saw that and I was expecting them to write a full paragraph and they didn't understand why is so-and-so only writing a sentence when I have to write a full paragraph. So we had a lot of discussions about how what is fair is not always seen as being equal, but everybody needs to get what they need in order to learn. And after a few of those discussions, my students understood, and then those discussions could stop because they no longer questioned why they were doing different things. And plus, it just got built into our routine that different students were doing different things at the same time, especially as I added in centers and things like that. They didn't even notice that other groups were doing different activities. All right, fourth reason to add differentiation to your lessons is to foster independent learning. Our goal as teachers is to make our students as independent as we can. We don't always want to have to be there walking them through the steps of every single activity. We want them to be able to take it and do it on their own. In Facebook groups lately, I have been seeing a lot of teachers saying that they need to find ways to make their students more independent. Their students need them right there at every single second, helping them. And differentiation is one way to move away from that. When you give your students choice boards, those are a great way to differentiate. You're letting them use their strengths. When they can use their interests, they are more engaged, and that is going to make them more independent as well because they can choose activities where they feel successful. So if you're doing literacy centers, one great thing to do for that is choice boards. If you have a writing center, give them a writing choice board that allows them to choose activities that really resonate with them and that they can be successful with. If you're doing a word work center, give them their list of words, but then let them choose how they want to practice those words. Those are just a few ideas for how to promote independence in your students. And as you start giving them choices, as you start having them work in centers when you are doing something else, meeting with another group probably, they're eventually going to figure out how to do those things more independently, asking their classmates maybe. I always hung up anchor charts with directions as well, or with the steps that we use to solve a certain type of problem. And if they came to interrupt my group, I would just point to that chart and tell them to go and try to figure it out on their own. My students also knew that during that center time, I just expected them to do their very best work. As long as I felt like they were putting effort in, they weren't going to get in trouble for not getting all the questions correct. It was just do your very best, try it on your own, and then in small group the next day, I was able to go back through some of that center work with them and make sure that we cleared up any misunderstandings. All right, reason number 5 why you need to use differentiation is to improve your student outcomes. We want our students to feel successful, and some of them, without this differentiation, they do not feel successful. They get frustrated, they feel upset because they feel like they're stupid, like they're not understanding it, and it's just because the material isn't being presented in a way that they can understand or being broken down and scaffolded for them, which is what differentiation is going to do. Let me give you a quick example. I originally used guided reading groups for my small group reading instruction, and they worked, but the problem was that we were trying to do too much in one small guided reading group. First of all, we would do a picture walk, we would talk about vocabulary, we would do some comprehension questions, fluency work. It was too much in one lesson, and my students weren't able to focus in on one specific thing that I wanted them to practice. The other problem with guided reading groups was that I formed those groups at the beginning of the year based on their F&P level. So if they were level M, they were in a group with other level Ms. If they were level P, they were in a group with other level Ps. And unless a student really made huge growth or really regressed in their reading, they pretty much stayed in those groups for the entire school year. So I had a student one year, at the beginning of the year, I put them into their reading groups. And this student recognized that they were in a group with a couple of other students that they had been in with the previous year. And he just completely shut down on me. He wouldn't answer questions in my group. He wouldn't do anything in group. And I couldn't figure out exactly why. I kind of assumed that this kid just didn't like reading. So I was like, all right, so next day I will talk to them and figure out what the problem is. Well, the next day I formed the groups differently. I used what I knew about the students from some assessments that we had done, and I grouped them based on a different skill from what I was doing the day before. And he was in a completely different group. And it was like a completely different child came to that group that day. He was engaged, he was answering my questions, and I was like, what just happened? So I pulled him after group and I just asked him, between yesterday and today, there's been a huge difference. You did such a great job today. And he told me that it was because of the group he was in. The day before, he had gotten really upset because he thought that he was in the low group again. He had been with those students in second grade. He knew that it was the low group because of the way the groups were structured. He could tell by the other students in his class. And he just assumed that he was stuck in that group again for the whole year. The second day, when he realized he was with some other students, some of the higher students in the class, because kids aren't dumb, they know exactly where they kind of fall in that ranking. And he knew that he was with some of the higher students, and that just motivated him. He wanted to answer questions. He was listening carefully to what they were saying. So that's one of the main reasons I switched from guided reading groups to strategy groups, is because my students really noticed what groups they were in, and they also allowed me to target specific skills the students needed. So we would focus on, let's say, point of view. If that was our skill for the week, we would focus on that in our small group. Everything else, whether it was fluency or picture walks, all of those things weighted. We might have taken a day for those things, but those would have been the specific things that we focused on that day. So a strategy group was only based on one specific skill, and I was able to mix my students up because I was focused on that skill and used an assessment that I had given to see where they fell, so that I could work with the students who were struggling, or so that I could push those students who already mastered it. And that made the students go into different groups, either daily or weekly. Usually it was weekly that I changed them. It was just at the beginning of the year that I was kind of trying to figure out where they fit in to be able to switch them up daily. But weekly is usually how often they were switched. And I saw huge growths in my students, especially those struggling students. Number one, because they didn't feel like they were in the dumb group. And number two, because they were able to hear the conversations that some of those higher students were having, they were able to join in, or even just by listening and hearing what those other students were saying and how they were thinking about reading really helped them along the way. All right, so those are the 5 reasons to use differentiation in your classroom. We are going to be talking a lot more about strategies to help you with differentiation, ways to build this into your lessons. If you're curious about guided math or strategy groups, I linked to 2 blog posts down below the video that you can go to learn more about how I set those up. There will also be future videos about those too. You can also head over and join the Differentiated Difference Facebook group. That's where I will be sharing more tips for differentiation as well. And if you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss any videos. You can also comment with any questions you have about differentiation, and I will be sure to answer those as well. All right, I will see you next Friday for another differentiation video.